So once again, thank you everybody for joining us today for our honest conversations on Fearology, everyday fears in the workplace. Today's guest speaker is Mary Poffenroth, who we're very pleased to have with us. Mary is a biopsychologist who studies fear in her role as faculty for Silicon Valley's oldest university, San Jose State in California. Her book, The Courageous Mind, will be published by Hachette early next year, and she joins us today to share some of her favorite tools for navigating the everyday fears we all face. So Mary, please take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. And thank you for everyone that can join live today, as well as everyone that took the time out of their day to watch the Zoom recording later on. So we're going to be doing some interactive things. I will be popping some things into the chat, as well as modeling how we're going to use these in our time together. And really, my goal for today is that we learn a little bit more about our own just totally normal, totally human experiences of fear, and to give ourselves permission to be afraid, that it is part of the human condition. It's what makes us human and allows us to be empathetic towards others, as well as know when we're stretching ourselves beyond our comfort zone towards the life that we really want to lead. And if you have not done so yet, I see a couple people came on the chat. I'm going to pop this in. We're going to be doing a Mentimeter, which is going to be right now. Then I'm going to do introduce a little activity on a Miro board, and then we will do some more kind of like tools. But don't feel at all overwhelmed, because there will be a recording for this, and all of the tools will also be available to you on a website that I'm going to give you at the very end. So let's go ahead and check in with our word cloud. And let me instead of music today, I'm just going to sing to you. Hopefully that's all right. If I could share screen. Oops. All right, so some really good words coming in on the word cloud. I'm going to let this run for a couple more minutes, and I'm going to come back to it in a different part of our day. But if you haven't had a chance, and you can add more than one of these, if you haven't had a chance to contribute to the word cloud, it's just going to continue to grow. And I invite you to do this as we are discussing different things today. So really good ones. As the words get bigger, that means that more people are contributing that particular word. So fear of failure, huge. Spiders, also really huge, hopefully like less huge than the fear of failure. And, obviously like thinking about all of the fears and anxieties around COVID in the past couple of years that have been a really, really tough year. So it'll be really exciting to see what people come up with. So I encourage you to contribute to our word cloud, and we're going to come back to this a little bit later. So since I have screen share on, actually, I'm going to come back to this. So let that run. As you're putting what you're most afraid of into that word cloud, I want you to take a moment and, on a scale of 1 to 10, like right now, where is your stress level? If 1 is totally not stressed at all, and 10 is, oh my gosh, really, really stressed, just give yourself a number right now. What is that number for you? Think about that number and then like write it down, or just, know that you're going to come back to it in just a minute. I want to start off our day with a really easy exercise to kind of down-regulate the fear response in the brain. And when someone is in tremendous anxiety, when someone is really stressed out, people around them can be sometimes, they're trying to be helpful, but sometimes unhelpful for me anyway. Okay, just take deep breaths. When someone tells me to breathe, that's when I stop breathing. Like, don't tell me what to do. But it's one of the most easy ways to kind of help to down-regulate in the moment. And there's lots of different complicated ways to do this, but I will always forget them. So for me, as someone who has ADHD and still needs to find ways to navigate through these experiences, I need things to be simple. So I try to use science to create simple tools that people can use. And this is not one that I created, but one that I really like. This is going to be called box breathing. And it was created by the Navy SEALs. And if you think about a box has 4 sides, and it's going to be really simple. You're just going to breathe in for the count of 4. Then you're going to hold your breath for the count of 4. You're going to breathe out for the count of 4. And then you're going to hold your breath again for a count of 4, and then repeat that. We're just going to do it together for 3 times, like 3 cycles. And I'm going to do a very kind of awkward cueing as I'm breathing in as well. But this is something that can help you in the moment, and no one knows what you're doing. And you can do it as much as you need to until you come to that place of calm. So let's all just kind of do it together. So we're going to inhale for a count of 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to hold our breath for a count of 4. This is where my fingers kind of have to decide. Okay, 4. Then we're going to breathe out for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to hold our breath for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's go ahead and do it 2 more times. And an inhale for 4. We're going to hold that breath for 4. And we're going to breathe out for 4. And then we're going to hold it again for 4. And our last time together, breathing in for 1, 2, 3, 4. Holding that breath for 4. Breathing out for 4. And holding our breath for 4. All right, so coming back, what is that number now? Is it on that scale from 1 to 10, 1 being not so stressed, 10 being super stressed? Did that number change for you at all? And if it did, yay. And if it didn't, well, luckily I have more tools for you. So it doesn't work for everyone, but it definitely works for me. So hopefully you were able to bring that stress level down closer to the 1 and away from that 10. All right. Now that we're hopefully in a good space, I'm going to share my screen again. All right. And Jeff, if you can pop the Miro board link into the chat box for me. This is something that's also going to run. I'm going to cue it now. I'm going to cue it again right in the middle, and then I'm going to use it. Then we're going to talk about it at the very, very end of our time together. So this is just a fun little Miro board. What I would love for you to do is add a picture of something that makes you feel brave. Okay, anything that you want to share with the group. There's a couple of ways. I'm just going to show you how to add a picture to it. I'm going to add my dog Bandit, and I can drag and drop directly onto it, especially if I'm on a computer. But if you're on a phone or it doesn't work well for your computer, you can also go to this little box here. It looks like a box with an arrow, and you just go ahead and click on that. And there's lots of different ways that you can upload directly into the space. You can also, so that we have room for everyone, if it came out really big, like little Mr. Bandit did, make it a little smaller so that everyone has room. And this is a freeform space, so just feel free to add any picture. It could be a picture of something in your real life, or it can be something that inspires you that is just an image from the internet. But I invite you to contribute to this co-creation process as we think about the other side of fear, right? The other side of fear isn't a lack of fear. It is, as the famous quote goes, being afraid but doing it anyway. So think about things that make you feel brave. And we're going to come back to this a little bit later. And excellent, some really good ones happening so far. Love it. Okay, so while those 2 things are running, just going to dive into a couple of more like kind of tools and thinking about how we as a society talk about fear, teach our kids about fear, communicate with one another around fear, and communicate with ourselves. It's so easy for society and media and the stories that we tell ourselves to say, oh, just be fearless, right? That's kind of the only instruction that I got around how to deal with this totally normal part of being a human, which is really unhelpful, because fearlessness is biologically nearly impossible. And then when we feel like we're afraid, totally normal. When we have an anxious feeling, totally normal, but we don't feel normal. We feel like it's only us having these feelings, that we should be ashamed of these feelings. And so we definitely don't want to talk about these feelings. Yet we're comfortable talking about happiness and joy, the more positive feelings, but there's not any life that can just have positive feelings. And it allows us to create authentic connections with others when we're more honest about what's happening with us, and having the verbiage to be able to do so and the permission to do so. I know growing up in school, I never got any tools on how to navigate really difficult emotions. I just got told to like stuff it down. The movie Frozen totally resonated in so many ways, because as kids, we were not taught how to really thrive with these difficult emotions of our life. So I really encourage everyone to start thinking about how we speak about our fears, how we both to ourselves and to others, and start to just pay attention to fear is a really powerful tool for other people to FOMO, fear of missing out, right? Or it's a powerful tool to be able to control others. It's a powerful marketing tool. So it's something that is so ubiquitous in our world, yet we're really only comfortable talking about it in the form of something, around like Halloween or haunted house. When we think about the different types of fear, we're going to what I call so there's internal and external fear, as well as factual fear and fictional fear. So let's start with the internal and external fear. Our Mentimeter board has been running for a little bit, so let's go ahead and jump back into our word cloud and see where that's going. Okay, excellent, that looks great. I'm going to share screen. So what are you most afraid of, right? Make it a little bit bigger. Maybe I won't. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Oh, too big. Okay. So we have, like snakes, we have spiders, we have, let's see, I'm doing some reading. Okay, let's see what else. We have, looking for like external ones. These are, oh my gosh, these are so good. So like external fears are going to be something that is outside of ourselves, right? That it's not something having to do with us as a person, but something that we are afraid of in the outside world, right? Fascism is like another external fear. Then we have the internal fears. Internal fears are going to be those that are about who we are as a person. Ones on our Mentimeter that are going to be kind of internal fears are going to be high expectations, right, of ourselves, maybe of others, fear of dying, right? Fear of no longer being in control. That's going to be important when we go back to our RIA method. Fear of failure, excellent. And wasting one's potential, not being appreciated, losing independence. This is a huge one. Aging, not having purpose. These are so good. And these are, all going to be what we call internal fears. And the reason why it's important to start making these designations is if we can start to move from a space of just being carried away with the feeling of fear, then we can start to navigate through the choppy waters of fear. When we think about the biology of the fear response, it's a bit more involved than what we have time for today, but very briefly, the two big players that we have in our brain is going to be the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. So the amygdala, think about the amygdala as our super overprotective grandmama who does nothing but stay home and never leaves the house because it's too scary and watches nothing but true crime films and listens to the true crime podcasts and only sees the danger in the world. That's going to be our amygdala. Our amygdala is actually a pair of structures. They're going to be almond shaped, and in your brain, if you take your hands, you start at your jawline, go up to about your brow line, and if you were to go to like the center of your brain, that's where the pair of your amygdalas would be. Not the dead center, but kind of like half and half. And this is going to be the part of your brain that's all about protection. And our fear arousal is just our amygdala trying to keep us safe, trying to make sure that we survive. However, in modern times, much of the things that make us afraid, much of the things that we're having a really, really big fear arousal to actually don't impact our ability to survive. So being able to tease out the things that we do need to worry about versus the things that we don't need to worry about is an essential part of being able to navigate the complexities of living in our human times. The other part of the brain that is going to be essential for just thinking about how we deal with our fear is going to be the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex, if we took our palm and we like slapped it onto our forehead and went behind the skull, that's where our prefrontal cortex is going to be. That is going to be the part of the brain that is responsible for being able to have what we think of as our humanness, right? Our ability to create, our ability to plan, our ability to think and problem solve. One of the problems that happens when our amygdala takes over and goes into super protector mode is our prefrontal cortex, the part that is our human thinking brain, goes offline. It's just like, okay, well, amygdala is driving the bus. And this is why, it can be not the best place to allow our fears to just run away with us, because then we can't create, then we can't problem solve. So having these ways to deal with the totally normal, totally everyday experiences that we all can really connect to in that Mentimeter word cloud is going to be essential. And that's where the tools come in. So thinking about, all right, are these fears internal or external? That's going to be an important first piece. And then the next important piece is going to be deciding if the fear that you are dealing with is going to be a factual fear or a fictional fear. I use the term factual and fictional because in the scientific literature, they use, and in many psychology, especially the older stuff, use really inappropriate words. But in literature, it's called clean and dirty fear, which has a lot of weird connotations and I don't like. So I use factual versus fictional because I love books. So that's what I'm using. So the fictional fear, that's going to be all the fears that may or may not have a grain of truth, but these are the things that we're going to worry and ruminate over. The things like, oh, am I tall enough? Am I smart enough? Am I fill in the blank enough? Or, oh, I think that person definitely does not like me because they didn't do A or they didn't do B, right? Those are not something that we have any facts behind, but something that can really impact our ability to thrive. And factual fear, well, factual fear is going to be the fears that are in a space of shared reality with others and something that our body does really well to process pretty quickly. So I'd like to share a story of a factual fear of, I was with my boyfriend and his adult son. They were doing Mount Whitney, which is the tallest peak in United States. And I think it's North America, United States. Anyways, it's really tall. And there was no way I was going to be able to do that climb with them. So they went off and it was his birthday. So, I was doing like base camp support. So I thought it'd be a really good idea to go and to the little town and get like a total, carnivore pizza. All the meats, all the cheeses, all the yumminess, and that was going to like surprise them when they came down off the trail. Now, because it's the woods and there's like a big bear box, and I'm like going to be smart because I'm a biologist, and I put the pizza into the bear box, all nice and hot and fresh. And I go meet them at the end of the trailhead, and they're at the car, getting ready to drive off. And I'm like, okay, I'll be right back. I have a surprise. Walk over to the bear box, and I'm digging around because it's quite a big bear box and there's other people's food. And I hear people yelling behind me, but they're not yelling in English, and I don't know any other languages, but it was definitely yelling towards me. And so I'm, kind of like inside the bear box, and I look up, and there's a huge black bear on top of the bear box looking down at me. And, I grab my pizza, I shut the door because I'm, a nice community member. And then I start running towards the car, yelling, bear, bear, start the car with the pizza. And I jump in the car, and my boyfriend's like, wait, why didn't you just leave the pizza? Maybe not the smartest thing I've ever done, but hey, that pizza was really expensive and it was a birthday gift. It wasn't for the bear. But in that moment, I didn't have to think about what to do. Clearly, because I took the pizza, I should have left the pizza for the bear. But in that moment, my body took over, and that, like, I definitely wasn't going to fight. So my flight took off, and I didn't need to worry or ruminate. My body knew what to do. And as soon as I got in the car and we were, on our way to safety, I wasn't worried about what had happened because I'd already processed it. It was actually pretty funny because everyone was fine. And I'm able to share that story with you because that's, an example of an external fear. But internal fears are the ones that really last. Those are the ones that keep us up at night. Those are the ones that keep us from living the life that we really want, because they're so hard to process. And that's where really my tools are going to be important, or really the most helpful for. So let's move on to those said tools. I'm going to share something with you. And there's also two different versions of this on, Jeff, if you can toggle to the Honest Conversations URL in the chat box in case people wanted a copy for themselves as we're going over it. So the link in the chat will have two, both an accessible and an infographic version, depending on which version is best for you. And this is just going to be what we're going to talk about today for a tool. So we talked about factual and fictional, as well as moving into what is called what I call the RIA method. This is something that is based on scientific research that I have come up with, and is an easy way to start navigating through some of these everyday fears. So RIA is going to stand for, leave that size. So recognize for R, identify, and then address. We're going to go through these. I initially wanted to, I was kind of playing around with the name of it. And then I went on a podcast, and kind of the early days of this method with Ali Ward, a wonderful podcast. If you haven't heard of it before, it's called Ologies. And as I was talking about it, I said I'm still kind of on the fence on if I want to stick with the name RIA. I mean, it's a little bit of a placeholder. But as I was talking about the method as well as just fear itself with Ali Ward, she was like, "Oh yeah, RIA. No, I get it. Because digestive distress. That's what I have. RIA, diarrhea. You have to keep this name." It was just so funny. So it kind of stuck. So we're here with RIA. But coming back to that, of the first space of recognizing that you are in a fear response, that there is that sense of fear arousal. Now, everyone is going to have a little bit different experience with how your body physically reacts to something that's making you afraid. And fear is going to be on that kind of spectrum, right? There's going to be, it can be a slight fear arousal or really heavy fear arousal, depending on what that particular trigger is. And a fear trigger is going to be different for everybody. And there's no way to, let's say, just get rid of your fear response. You can get better at experiencing much less fear as you practice with some one thing, but you're never going to get rid of your whole human fear response, because you wouldn't want to. If you didn't have a fear response, then that would be really dangerous just to walk around. You wouldn't fear getting hit by a car, so crossing the street safely would not be good. It would make you a dangerous driver. It wouldn't help you be empathetic towards other people. So you don't want to get rid of your fear response in totality, but recognizing is really the first step to know that it's even happening, because sometimes we don't know it's happening. So think about how does your body feel when you're in a fear response? For me, I'm like a shoulder scruncher. So like my shoulders will literally be next to my ears. And I'm like a jaw clencher. Those are two of my tells that I know that if I'm doing this, or I'm really clenching hard in my jaw, then something's going on. Something is kicking up my fear arousal response. And many of you maybe right now are like, oh no, that's what I do in stress. Here's a little secret. Stress and the fear arousal are the same thing. What we call stress in modern society, many psychologists argue isn't something that exists in that way. It's just an access to the fear arousal response. Because when we look at stress and we look at the biological definitions of what happens in a fear arousal response, they're the same. Right? We may not think of it that way, but the amygdala is getting kicked up and creating these physiological actions in our body that when we start to be able to tell what our particular experiences are, then we know, oh, okay, there's something going on. All right, let me get curious about why my body is doing this. What is my body trying to tell me? You may be someone that gets dry mouth. You may be someone that gets sweaty. You may be someone like Ali Ward that gets digestive distress. And now this is totally public on her thing, so I'm not giving away any secrets, but thinking about what your fear responses are is going to help you recognize when you are in a fear response. Let me go ahead and share screen again for our second part. So identify. Also, this is going to be as a JPEG, also available on the website that Jeff boosted with the / honest conversations that you can download just as an individual image to your phone. This is going to be an important step because many times when we start to notice that we're starting to get into a fear response, well, now what do we do about it? That thing that we can do is to start to add some logic into our emotional experience. The language of the amygdala is all about that raw emotion, where the language of the cortex is going to be about logic. Now, depending on everything, every experience is going to be different. If you're having a very extreme fear arousal response, it can be really difficult to maneuver these. But that's hopefully not a lot of your everyday experience. So this will be able to, help you navigate, oh, got to go and do a, presentation, or I need to have a really big meeting with, my manager, or I need to have a, really, exciting conversation, but a little nerve wracking with my significant other. Those type of instances, this will be really helpful. So identifying is this whole name it to claim it. This is going to be an opportunity for you to decide on a word other than stress. When we put everything into the big bucket of stress, we're not really dealing with it. We're just kind of shoving this uncomfortable, kind of icky feeling into the back of the closet, thinking that we'll come back to it, and we never do. So in the moment, allowing yourself to decide what is the exact thing that I'm feeling in this moment can help you to regain power over that runaway emotional response. So in this moment, am I feeling ridiculed? Am I feeling dread because I know that I didn't prepare for my class presentation? Or what kind of things are coming up on that particular, once you recognize that you're having a fear arousal response, what are kind of the specifics of that feeling? And sometimes just being able to recognize it and give it a name can really help to dissipate those feelings that are coming up, because then it's not some nebulous unknown. It's something that is going to be part of having an exact answer. Before we get to the address, I want to just chime in really quickly and see how our Miro board is going. If you haven't had a chance to do the Miro board yet, if Jeff, if you could add the link in the chat, that would be super wonderful. So let's take a look at our Miro board before we get to the address. Awesome, love it. Things are happening. Oh my gosh, I love it. Wonderful, wonderful, love it. Imagery, great. Okay, so this is going to be still open. We're going to do a little bit with this at the very end of our time. So if you haven't had a chance to add something to our co-created Miro board, please do so. And the link is in the chat. All right, coming back to our address. So the next way is going to be address, right? Thinking about how you can categorize, like, what you're feeling into a deeper sense of the two biggest buckets of where our fears are going to come from for those, internal fictional fears, the ones that we have the most power to control. Thinking about, does the thing that is associated with these feelings right now fit into the bucket of feeling like I'm afraid because I'm not enough? Or does it fit into the bucket of fear of losing control? Sometimes if it's really complex, it can fit into both, but really the point of this part of the RIA method is to allow us and our brains to categorize to feel safe. So much of when our amygdala is overreacting to something is because for whatever reason, we're getting the message that we don't feel safe. Sometimes that is going to be from a memory. It could be a memory from childhood. It could be a recent memory, but there's some memory telling the amygdala there was a time when we experienced this thing that we were not safe. We did not feel safe. So part of how you can help your brain feel safe is to give it some logic, right? We humans love to organize. We love to sort things because it makes us feel safe with our world. The world and the environment's really chaotic and it doesn't always make sense. And so when we can give some sense of order to our world, that immediately can just help to calm the amygdala and help us to feel safer. So just in the moment thinking, all right, now I've pinpointed it. Is it because I don't feel in control of the situation? That can be something like, going into a meeting where you don't, your manager said, hey, can we have I hate when people say, can we talk? Even if it's a good thing, it just makes me so nervous when anyone says, hey, can we talk? And so you don't know what's going on. And that may be a little bit of both, right? Maybe you're feeling really uncomfortable in your job, maybe you're new, but also you don't have control over the situation because you don't know what you're going to be talking about. But just in that moment, deciding if you had to pick just one bucket, where would that fear trigger end up in? So again, this is going to be available in the infographic as well as a reader accessible download on the website, as well as this as an individual image. So that's going to be another one of the tools that you can have in your back pocket that will allow you to continue to navigate just the normal everyday kind of experiences that we all deal with when moving through our everyday lives. All right, I definitely want to give some time for Q&A because we're just about it. Well, I'm 10:40 here over on the West Coast here in Los Angeles. So let me do one more pop in with our Miro board. This little, oh, there we go. See if I can get a little bit larger bird's eye view here. And really, really great contributions, both here on the Miro board as well as on our word cloud. And one of the best ways to start to get braver. And bravery is a muscle. Courage is a muscle. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Just like the more squats you do, the stronger your gluteus maximus is going to get. So bravery is a practice, but also you can make it go faster if you do it in community, if you do it with others, when you don't feel that you're just by yourself, that you see that others around you are doing the same things that you are in terms of feeling afraid of the normal parts of life and what kind of things are making other people feel brave. So here on this mirror board, I really want to thank everyone for contributing such beautiful imagery of the things that inspire us to feel brave. And I really invite you, before we move to the Q&A, to think about other ways that you can invite more bravery into your life and make it a practice, and share that with others, because when we co-create, when we do this in community, then we can get so much braver together. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to open it up to questions and answers, and I'm going to stop share. And
Melanie has asked, once you realize your fictional fear falls in the fear of losing control bucket, what can you do to accept or lessen this fear?
Yeah, so that's going to be more of a, okay, so we recognized it, we've identified it, and it falls into that bucket. The RIA method is about, in the moment, kind of short-circuiting that feeling. But if it's something that is coming up a lot, then it's going to be something that you would want to do a bit more like work on. The RIA method's only kind of like supposed to be like in the moment. But some things that come to mind, depending on what it is, the kind of experiences that we do in practice in a like safer environment can help us like be better at it without kind of the high risk situation that is causing it. Like one example would be, okay, so I don't think well on my feet, or I don't feel confident speaking up in meetings at work. So maybe one way to start to habituate yourself into that is doing an improv class where you don't know anybody, it's only 5 people, it's on Wednesdays at 9 p.m., and you're able to practice that speaking and that thinking on your feet and that yes and attitude in a space that doesn't have the same triggers as at work, or doesn't have as much risk. That can be one way. If there was more of an example, I could maybe give like different ways to do that, but experience will help us build those muscles so that when it does occur in like a really high risk or like very important situation, we know what to do, that it's kind of almost that muscle memory, and not waiting to just have that, be the high risk version that we're practicing in.
All right, so there are more questions coming in, several more actually. There are a bunch in the Q&A section. I'm going to ask the one more that is in the chat before I go to the Q&A ones. How can we make our fears work for us instead of hindering us?
Yes, such a good one. Well, you all showed up today, so you are already on the pathway to doing that, and really deciding, okay, what is the fears that I need to listen to and not? Where are these fears coming from? And the things that are going to be working for us, is it something that we need to actually keep us safe, right? Or is it, I want to feel safe because the thing is new and scary. So really that first piece, and this is a, obviously very much like larger conversation, but that first piece is recognizing, where is this particular fear coming from, right? And getting very specific. It's always important, because just like there's lots of flavors of ice cream, there's lots of flavors of fear in the things that we're afraid of. Some things that we should continue to be afraid of, but some things that we shouldn't. So thinking about, I'll use an example from my life of, I didn't travel really until I was in my 30s, because to my mom who raised me, traveling was really scary. Dangerous stuff happened outside of the house. But I was always fascinated with stories of other people traveling the world. And also growing up as, like a female, was the messaging that the world's a scary place. Bad things can happen if you go traveling by yourself. And I had to decide how to really start to like pick those things apart in what was messaging from me and what I believed, and what was just the stories being told to me. And that's when the practice came in, of just starting to travel internationally by myself. And it was really scary. And then, but the more I did it and the more I didn't die, then I like got to like, be a little bit more brave with these things. But for me, I think a big turning point with that was deciding, okay, so here's all the reasons why I shouldn't. What are my reasons, and what are reasons given to me by other people, whether that was from my family, whether that was from media, the stories that I saw on TV or read, or the stories just being told to me from my community, and then deciding what actually made sense to me and what I wanted to believe. That for me was a big, huge aha moment to start moving through that fear of traveling by myself.
Now I'm going to move through the Q&A portion of the chats. We have a Q&A box and the chat box, so I'm looking at both. The first one in here is, can you use cognitive behavioral therapy to help with overcoming fear? Just wondering.
Yeah, so I generally tend to, so when we think about just the study of fear in totality, there's the clinical side, which most of the literature is going to be focused on, which is dealing with, like phobias and clinical anxiety. And that's best done in, an office with a, trained kind of professional around one-on-one type of stuff, which is where that CBT is best done, even though there's books on CBT. CBT, it can absolutely be used for both everyday fear as well as clinical and anxiety fear. I give that caveat because CBT is a clinical therapy, and I work in a space of more on the academic research side, and I'm not a clinical therapist. And so if one is to like prescribe a therapeutic thing, therapy can be used for many different things, but I just kind of want to give that caveat. But yes, in short, like CBT can be used to help people navigate these things. Also kind of depends. So talk therapy doesn't work for everyone, but you don't know till you try. If you're having a lot of amygdala-based reactions, it doesn't always work well because, like I was saying, that the amygdala language is really about emotion and experience. So really the only way to retrain your amygdala is through experience. So talk therapy doesn't always work. But if you're having a lot of kind of cortex-based fear responses, then CBT could be helpful for that.
Okay, the next question up is, I have no control with blushing and I'm aware of it, especially knowing others see it. Any ways I can stop blushing?
Probably not, unfortunately, because that's just like your physiology, right? Our body, unless if it's something that you're reacting to that is like a fear-based response, then kind of, like I was saying, like going through those experiences and no longer being afraid of that particular thing, whatever that thing is, then that can help to like decrease that reaction, because you're not afraid, so you're not going to blush if blushing is if that like physiological response to it. However, removing your body's ability to have that as a reaction isn't probably going to happen. But let's say if you know that you blush every time you talk in front of a group, right? Talking in front of a group is something I go back to because it's such a huge fear. And part of that is because evolutionary adaptations for survival in the human brain of both, again, the amygdala is looking for eyes looking at us tend to start for us to think, okay, is this friend or foe? Is predator? Do I need to worry about all these eyes looking at me? And also fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being rejected by our community is, those two things together, those multifaceted things together make speaking a really fear-inducing thing for many people. But let's say that's your thing, right? One way you could help to like decrease that blushing would be to continually practice getting up and talking in front of people. That so much where it becomes so comfortable, it stops happening in that particular trigger because you've gotten so comfortable with it. But your body will, that's just how your physiology works. And so there's not really too much to do about it in and of itself.
That was an interesting question and an interesting answer, because yeah, we can get past things mentally, but find that our body still reacts in a way that is sort of automatic, if you will. And that,
yep.
that theme is going to come back, not with the next question, but with two questions from now. So the next question is, fear for me often comes up on its own subconsciously. Sometimes you have no control over that and have to face what happens. Okay, that's not actually a question, but it is a very good statement. I appreciate that being shared. The next, there is a question here. There's a question followed by what looks like a bit of a context. So how do you identify how to sort a fear like illness? Prior to the pandemic, I was a bit of a hypochondriac, but with the pandemic, my fictional fear all of a sudden became very real. I'm still struggling with this in the workplace, where not everyone is as nervous as I am.
Excellent question. And especially as we think about the pandemic, how it changed like just all of our lives. This is my first pandemic, pretty sure it's your first pandemic. So giving ourselves, before I get into the other stuff, a little bit of grace and honoring how hard the last couple of years have been. And I come back to this example of bravery and courage being a muscle, just like, our biceps and triceps and, other muscles in our body are. Of if you don't, like if you were a marathon runner before the pandemic and you had really strong muscles and then you didn't run for 2 years, you're not going to have the same strength as you did before the pandemic. And it's going to take a while to get back to that space. And I say that because it can make it even harder if you're comparing the level for you of your ability to navigate this, phobia, if it was clinically diagnosed, or just the kind of like anxiety around it before the pandemic. And then the pandemic essentially became your worst nightmare because now the entire planet is having to deal with this. So giving yourself some grace and some permission to not feel bad that you're a marathon runner before, but you haven't ran for 2 years. Coming back to that, of the fictional fear, again, can have a nugget of truth in it. That nugget of truth is, disease and cleanliness and not wanting to be around pestilence. These are all fears because they kept our species alive. If you think about the evolution of where these fears came from, clean equals healthy, good, survival, great. Disease, bad, because that means death. Very simple terms, but the amygdala is a very ancient part of the brain. It operates in very simple yes, no, on, off types of experiences. It's the cortex is where we have that nice gradation of colors, where our amygdala is black and white. So the fear of illness and the fear of contracting something is a fear that every single human has, right? But again, everything's on a spectrum. So starting there, that knowing that it's not just you, and then moving through how can you practice in a way that makes you feel safe, getting a little bit stronger on these things. This is going to really depend on how you react to specifics, or how what things are specifically triggers for you. For me, if I'm moving something that's making me really anxious and I I know that I'm having a fear response in it, I will just, do like a repetitive mantra of, like, I am strong, I am safe. I am strong, I am safe. I am strong, I am safe. Because really it's your amygdala taking over and short circuiting what you want to do. Like, you want to go to work, you want to not feel afraid at work. So how can you make your amygdala feel better? Those would be my recommendations. Kind of like, to get like more specific, I would need to like know a little bit more about the exact triggers. And there's also, if you go to the website link, that's the marypoffenroth.com/honest conversations. Everyone on the call or who's watching this has access to a 13-part video series that's totally free. You don't need to sign up or anything. It's free for attending our webinar today. And that will go into things a little bit more deeply than we can on this call. And of course, if you have any questions, my contact information is also there if you wanted to ever reach out.
Okay, so I'm gonna, in the interest of having something of a smooth transition and time, we have about 5 more minutes. There's still another question in the chat. There are a few more in the Q&A. I am going to ask the next one in the Q&A, but then I have to run. My colleague Sophia Dritsas is going to take over managing the Q&A and the questions in the chat, though. So the final question that I am going to read off here is, what do you do? And I said we'd come back to this. What do you do when your body is experiencing fear, but you mentally are over it?
So maybe you could like a little more about mentally over it, or?
That's what it said. So the body is still showing, what I'm getting from it is the body is still showing signs of fear, but mentally you feel like you've moved past it.
Okay, so maybe that sounds like that would be, if I had to guess, would be like an external fear happened. We'll go back to the bear and the pizza, right? That something happened and I'm already laughing in the car because we're driving away, but my body is still amped up on adrenaline, because there was this instant where my body had to add in the physiology to be able to allow me to deal with this threat that I did not plan. And it's something that you just have to let your body process it. To make things go faster, usually everyone's kind of a little bit different. Continuing to get your like activity, don't just not just sitting down, but like being active in whatever that looks like, you like taking a walk, whatever's appropriate, but being able to continue to allow your heart to pump things through the system so that you can come to a place of calm is a way to help to decrease the physiological reaction. That's probably my best recommendation. Some people, this is not something that I have the power to do, but some people would go into more of like, okay, I'm going to go meditate and be able to bring myself back to calm. Maybe one day I'll be that way, but I'm not quite there yet. But that can also be a way to help to decrease that.
Okay, we have 2 more questions in the Q&A, and then I see 1 more in the chat. So the next one is, fear for me often comes up on its own subconsciously. Sometimes you have no control over that and have to face whatever happens. How can you prevent that from happening?
Well, you can't prevent things from making you afraid. That's just part of it. But you can have tools in your toolbox to help to navigate through them. Like I was saying at the top of the hour, fearlessness it doesn't exist. We can practice to get better, but things are going to always make us afraid. They're always going to fire up our amygdala, and it's what we do in the moment that happens is going to be the important part of navigating through those feelings, and practicing when we're not in a really highly reactive space is also going to be important. If we think about like an Olympic swimmer, the first time that they swim is not on the day that they're competing for the gold medal. They're practicing every day. They're in the pool. They're practicing their form. at a low risk, low stress situation, so that when things are higher risk and higher stress, then they're able to have that muscle memory and move through it without like having to think about it too much because they practice in other ways.
Okay. And last question here in the Q&A, how about projecting fear? I know I have my own fears, but sometimes I think we might project it onto others. What do we do about that?
We could do a whole webinar on that one. Yes, projection is such a huge thing. I was, talking a little bit about how my mom projected her fears onto me and that I made them my own. We also, as humans, there's a thing called mirror neurons, where if you walked into a room, we'll go back to the public speaking thing, right? Let's say you're in a conference and the person on the stage speaking is super nervous, right? The whole room can feel it, right? Like now everyone else is getting nervous. And that's because as humans, mirror neurons allow us to understand and gauge what's happening. Because if someone in our community is nervous and we're not nervous, maybe we need to be nervous. Like, what are they nervous about? What do I know, right? So projecting is absolutely an important part of the fear arousal response. And again, it comes back to that evolutionary adaptation for survival. If there was something dangerous that one other person in our community knew and we didn't, then we need to know. But now things are a little bit different. So helping to navigate through these things, and then projection is like an even bigger thing when you're talking about raising kids or teaching or how we pass on this generational trauma and how to not pass on generational trauma. But yes, super, super important stuff.
And we have one last question before we wrap up. This one's in the chat. Does too much fear, stress early on in life affect the way our brain will develop and actually process subsequent fear or stresses?
So there is a lot of really interesting work around this, even like gestationally. If the mother, while pregnant, had a lot of fear and trauma, they can pass it on, to the unborn child, which is really interesting stuff. We're still looking at the mechanisms behind that, but psychologically speaking, if you are having to endure a lot of fear-based or just trauma at all as a kid, it will impact you as an adult. So it's something that, will you have more or less fear? It kind of depends on how you choose to live your life. If you're choosing to make strides, to understand how your brain works, to work better with your biology, to find the tools to navigate these really difficult experiences like everyone is doing here, then you're going to be better prepared for dealing with those things that you can't change in the past than someone who's not. So as someone that had already moved through that, the great thing, so look into neuroplasticity, which in short is the brain's ability to learn and change. We have this like amazing ability for our brain to learn and grow and change even as adults. So it's not something that is set in stone just because it's the way that you've been. And the way that you get to change is through doing things like this, through learning more about yourself and how to apply tools in the everyday and make it a bravery practice.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mary. We are at the end of our hour now. That was an excellent presentation, very engaging. We had some really great questions from the audience as well. So thank you again for joining us today, Mary. Thank you to our ASL interpreters as well. And thank you to everyone for participating today. Jeff will be following up later with all the tools and resources that were covered today. And again, we hope you enjoyed the webinar today. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.